Have you ever started a new year with excitement, only to find your progress in the gym and in life flatlining by February? Or maybe you retrying to eat better, but find that healthy foods just do you and taste as good as the alternatives. That breaking old habits and building new ones requires sheer willpower. In fact, you often hear phrases like it takes 21 days to build a habit, or it takes 4 weeks to break one. It is essential to design your environment so that it nudges you in the direction of the habits that will get you there. And that means making good habits easy to follow and bad habits difficult to follow. In this case, the routine is eating the chocolate. And finally, the third part of the loop is the reward. He says that all habits follow the same basic loop: cue, routine, reward. And then he adds a fourth variable called craving. Let me explain. Brushing your teeth is perfect because it happens twice a day, and it only takes a few minutes. Whereas eating chocolate is not ideal, because it only happens occasionally, and it can be very rewarding. In other words, you want to start small. Don't try to stack with a habit that's too hard to maintain. We tend to perform certain routines because they satisfy a craving, which could be for a drink, food, pleasure, or something else. For example, instead of saying, "I want to read more," say, "I want to read 5 pages of nonfiction every morning before breakfast." This is a simple psychological trick, where you pair a habit you want to build with an existing habit by saying, "When I do X, I will Y." For example, if you want to watch TV while eating, but you don't want to eat while watching TV, you would say, "I will only allow myself to watch TV if I'm eating vegetables." And while this sounds great, in theory, it can be difficult to put into practice, especially if you're trying to break a bad habit. But what about bad habits that aren't addictions? Well, in these cases, you can use a technique called habit reversal to eliminate the unwanted behavior. This involves replacing the bad habit with a good habit, such as replacing nail biting with hand washing. The key here is to choose a replacement habit that is incompatible with the bad habit you're retrying to break. For example, you wouldn't replace nail biting with playing with your hair because both activities involve your hands. Instead, you would choose a habit that's completely different, such as hand washing. This is because breaking a bad habit requires you to remove the reward associated with it, which can be difficult if the reward is an addiction, such as with drugs or alcohol. This way, the reward of watching TV incentivizes you to eat vegetables. And the great thing about this is that you can stack multiple habits at once. This was popularized by the author of The Power of Habit, Charles Duhigg, and it works by pairing an activity you enjoy with an activity you don't enjoy. So, for example, if you want to listen to a podcast while folding laundry, this will gradually reduce the strength of the habit loop for the bad habit until it eventually disappears. Now, this can take some time, so it's important to be patient and persistent. But you don't enjoy folding laundry. You would say, "I will only allow myself to listen to the podcast while folding laundry." Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Doing this turns the act of listening to the podcast into a reward for completing the task of folding laundry. So, for example, when I finish brushing my teeth, I will do 10 push-ups, and then I will drink a glass of water. What you're redoing here is taking advantage of the reward associated with brushing your teeth to incentivize yourself to complete the other habits. So to use our earlier example, when I finish brushing my teeth in the morning, by practicing this statement out loud, you train your brain to automatically initiate the new habit after the existing one. And this is important because the more you practice the pairing, the stronger the connection becomes between the two habits in your brain. Making it specific like this gives your brain something concrete to work towards, which makes it easier to build the habit. Once you have your habits defined, you can begin the process of stacking them together. Now, sometimes the cue automatically triggers the craving, such as when you see a chocolate bar and you automatically feel that craving for something sweet. Other times the craving comes first, such as when you start to feel thirsty and you're in a room full of cues, each telling you to grab one of the many sugary drinks around you. And in this case, it could be anything from feeling satisfied to having your stress levels reduced. And once this reward hits, your brain associates the entire loop, the cue, the routine, and the reward as a positive experience, and it stores this in your memory. So the next time you see chocolate, the cue activates your memory, and you feel that craving again. Cue, routine, reward. It is a cycle that is almost impossible to break, because your brain doesn't distinguish between a good habit and a bad habit. It simply reinforces the associations between cues, routines, and rewards. But the truth is that forming new habits is unsupposed to be hard work, because your brain was undesigned to do hard work. You see, evolution has favored the brain that conserves energy and effort. When you stack habits, you add a new routine to an existing habit loop. So, for example, if you want to start working out more, You might decide to work out after brushing your teeth because you already have the habit of brushing your teeth twice a day. Here you're piggybacking off an existing cue, routine, reward loop to establish a new one. And the key to success here is choosing the right existing habit to stack with. So if you want to form lasting habits, you need to use this to your advantage. I can relate. And if you're struggling, it's likely because you've been taught bad advice. For years, we've all been told that change is hard work. So in today's video, we're going to look at the science of habit stacking, which is the art of linking new, healthy habits to existing ones, so they become effortless to maintain. You see, every habit consists of three parts: a cue, a routine, and a reward. Now, you may be more familiar with cues, which are triggers that tell your brain to initiate a habit. For example, if you have a sweet tooth, you'll know that the mere sight of chocolate is enough to trigger an intense craving. This is the power of marketing. They know exactly what cues to use to trigger cravings for their products. But what's less talked about are the routines and rewards that complete the habit loop. Now, while some people might still prefer the term willpower, the scientific literature suggests that there are two processes that govern our behavior. One is conscious control, which allows us to override our instincts and urges in pursuit of long-term goals. The other is automatic behavior, which is driven by habits and occurs without conscious awareness. And it's this second process, our automatic behaviors, that account for 40% of our daily actions. In other words, most of what we do every day is governed by our habits. And since most of our daily actions are habitual, it makes sense to optimize these habits for health and productivity. Because if you want to make progress in any area of your life, but let's get back to the science of habit stacking. Because if you understand how habits work, you can design your environment to ensure that you stick to your new habits. Let's take eating chocolate as an example. If you give in to the craving, the next part of the loop kicks in, which is the routine. Now let's look at this process through the lens of Charles Duhigg's book, The Power of Habit. Okay, so now that we've covered the basics, let us talk about how habit stacking fits into this model. Because it allows us to hack the system. In general, you want to choose habits that have a high frequency, meaning they happen often, and a low intensity, meaning they aren't too difficult to perform. Next, you need to clearly define the habits you want to build. And the best way to do this is by using implementation intentions. Another way to put this is that you're re-leveraging the reward associated with the existing habit to incentivize yourself to perform the new one. And this brings us to another powerful technique called temptation bundling. Temptation bundling can also be used to restrict certain activities so that they only happen when you're re-performing the desired behavior. As you can see, these techniques work by leveraging the power of rewards to incentivize yourself to complete certain behaviors. In these cases, it can be helpful to seek professional help. Because overcoming addictions is a serious issue that should not be taken lightly. To successfully break the bad habit, you need to practice the replacement habit every time you're tempted to engage in the bad habit. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please make sure to subscribe and leave a like.